about 1950 when the building was first built. And we received word from President Gardner of the university in the fall that the university was pleased to name this building Helen Keller Hall and continue the tradition that was started over 30 years ago. So we thought that we would have a small but sweet dedication ceremony for the building through AER at this time. We have some very distinguished guests here today to dedicate the building, and I'd like to start with the representative of the university, Dr. Darrell Carter. Dr. Carter is the Assistant Dean of the School of Optometry.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Certainly, it's a great pleasure for me to represent the University of California and Chancellor Ira Michael Heyman of the Berkeley campus at this rededication of one of our buildings so as to continue to honor Helen Keller. The Board of Regents of the University of California has named this building Helen Keller Hall in recognition of her great service in improving the lives of the blind and visually impaired, both here in the United States and throughout the world. In considering the life and accomplishments of Helen Keller and her co-workers, I realize how much the two words, dedication and excellence, that we proudly use in describing the programs of research and teaching of the University of California, how much these two words also apply to Helen Keller and Anne Mansfield Sullivan, Helen Keller's teacher, companion, and friend. Helen Keller and Miss Sullivan, by their research into communication with outsider hearing, demonstrate the dedication and excellence that is nearly always necessary to accomplish major advances. Yes, I did say research of both Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller. At the age of 7 years, Helen Keller, for Helen Keller, and 20 years for Anne Sullivan, they began together the research into methodology necessary to allow Helen Keller to escape from the century prison that encased her. Their accomplishments together clearly demonstrated dedication and excellence. Helen Keller went on from this first accomplishment of research and teaching to many, many other accomplishments that changed for the better the lives of many impaired persons. The University of California is very pleased to be able to continue to honor Helen Keller by this building. The name of this building, Helen Keller Hall, and the life of accomplishments that it represents will inspire many of our students and their teachers to overcome the barriers to their own successes. One cannot study the life of Helen Keller without realizing that dedication and excellence can find their way to the solution of complex and difficult problems. We at the Berkeley campus of the University of California will be frequently reminded of the tools of progress, dedication, and excellence by this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. And now I'd like to introduce William Gallagher, who is the Executive Director of the American Foundation for the Blind in New York, who so kindly consented to come and speak with us today. And as many of you know, Helen Keller started the American Foundation for the Blind, was one of the major impetuses for the growth of the American Foundation for the Blind for many, many years. So, Mr. Gallagher, welcome to California.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Hall. It's a real pleasure and a privilege for me to be with you today for the honor that you, the University of California, look at our, when I say our, meaning those in the field of blindness and those that have been working in the field of education for blind and for deaf-blind persons, to rededicate this building to Helen. Helen worked for the American Foundation for the Blind for over 44 years, joined the staff in 1924 with Ann Sullivan Macy, and then later with Polly Thompson, and worked until 1968 at her death. June 27th is the birth date of Helen Keller, and she would have been 107 years old. Many people who come to the foundation who have been in the field for many years will relate different stories about Miss Keller. When they first met her, her charm, her interest in people. And that is one of the outstanding characteristics of Miss Keller, that she always wanted to know something about people. She not only worked and dedicated her life to blind and deafblind persons, but also was very much involved in working and helping minority groups, women's rights, and also civil rights of all different ways. She not only was a national figure, but was also an international figure. And recently, when going through the archives, I found out that they have named over 120 different agencies, programs, and buildings after Miss Keller. So this is a great honor to a great, great woman. And many of us at the American Foundation for the Blind, we are privileged to know that we worked in an agency that she set the stage for all of us. And Mrs. Hall, again, thank you very much for having me here, and I know the Board of Trustees of AFB are extremely pleased in the dedication and rededication of this building for Helen Keller. Thank you very much.
And now it is with great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Berthold Lowenfeld, who was the superintendent of the California School for the Blind when this building was dedicated to Helen Keller in 1950. And I think he can tell us some of the historical significance about this rededication. Dr. Lowenfeld.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to rededicate the building that we always called Helen Keller Building. It is now called Helen Keller Hall. And I may use a pun-like simile. We all think of Helen Keller Hall. Well, that has different connotations. I was just introduced by a Mrs. Hall. But there was also in the life of this building, and very instrumental in its construction, Ines B. Hall, the lady who was in charge of the education of deafblind children when I came to this school. She was an internationally known expert in the education of deafblind children, and Helen Keller was delighted to meet her when she came out for the dedication of this building. I think I ought to tell you a little bit about the dedication ceremony, as it was held in 1950, in October 1950. Many people, in fact hundreds of them, were assembled here. The walls that you see now were not here at that time. The outer wall was the limit, and there were hundreds of people seated in this space. Among them was Dr. Roy E. Simpson, the Superintendent of Instruction, Dr. Herbert R. Stoltz, members of the legislature, and perhaps the greatest of Californians, or one of the greatest of Californians, Governor Earl Warren. He was here with his wife for the dedication and stayed here. It started about 2 o'clock also, and he stayed here until late in the evening when it became dark and he had to go back to Sacramento. Later on, we learned that this was his wedding anniversary day. And I heard from him later on when I saw him again that it was one of the great days in his life. In fact, he wrote me about it, and he praised Helen Keller as a great humanitarian and one of the great women of our century. He said about the dedication, this is one of perhaps 1,000 public dedications in which I have participated, but I have never taken part in one that has given me as great a thrill as this simple ceremony. These are Governor Earl Warren's, Supreme Court, later on Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Rather than talk myself, I thought I would read to you a letter that I have received from Helen Keller after she returned to the East Coast and after her stay with us here in Berkeley. The letter reads as follows. Dear Bertolt Lohenfeld, with the glow of my last visit to Berkeley still bright in my mind, I must try to convey to you in words something of its significance to me. Many wonderful events whose fragrance lingers long in retrospect have happened to me, but the dedication at Berkeley of the first state school for deafblind children that bears my name stands by itself a mountain peak of memory, beautiful and awe-inspiring. What circumstances of spiritual nobility and light surrounded that occasion. It moves me inexpressibly that through your enlightened interest in the doubly handicapped, such a distinguished honor should have been bestowed upon me. Then there was the large-hearted enthusiasm with which Governor Warren raised the banner of a crusade against disasters that erase all good from life, and the people's warm interest centering around little ones who can be saved only through constant devotion and cooperative goodwill. Also, I was gratified to have dedicated to me a modern home of love and joy, where children without sight and hearing can grow up strong and resourceful for the struggle to win their share of usefulness and self-reliance. I only wish that my teacher Anne Sullivan Macy might be there actually and see her work fully recognized, for it was she who, regardless of innumerable obstacles, spurred me on to unceasing effort for those that languish in the dark silence. Because of her, another breach has been made in the prison walls of the world for the hosts of freedom to march through. Most verbal thanks are trite, but Polly's and my hearts throb with happy gratitude when we think of all the dear, thoughtful things you and Greta, that's my wife, did for us. It was a delight to see San Francisco again with two such perceptive friends, its bridges, both in sunlight and fog, the colorful bay, Mount Tamalpais, and the ever-fascinating Muir Woods. May I express a thought which came to me while we walked in the temple of those immortal trees? God has planted the sequoias as a vox viva, bearing witness to his thoughts infinitely beyond man's mind. As I breathe that their primeval owners stepped on their mighty roots and touched their trunks, which fire may scorch but cannot destroy, I was suddenly aware of beneficent forces deep down in human nature working towards fulfillment. Striking their roots ever deeper into God's spirit, taking flood and drought in serene strength, refusing to be swept aside by storms and flames of evil, they spread their influences over wider and wider neighborhoods of men and give longing to undreamed forms of beauty and harmony. Even so has knowledge grown through untold ages until it bears the wondrous fruit of special education. That fruit is above all price and difficult to obtain, But once realizing its potency, we gain an unbreakable faith that ignorance can be dispelled, sin decreased, and handicaps converted into new rays of light. It was a delightful brunch we had you and Greta Sunday morning, one of the classical meals I have read about, where friends can exchange ideas freely and grow into each other's hearts. The talk about Goethe, Kant, Heine, the wisdom of the East, and the curious happenings in nature refreshed me greatly. We loved to drive to the Golden Gate Monday and the fun of feeding the deer and the buffalo. Walking down the sands and putting my hand into the Pacific gave me a new sense of the bay, and I wished more than ever that I might live in San Francisco. All too soon, our enjoyable experiences came to an end, and Polly and I found ourselves bidding you both goodbye. But nothing can steal those precious memories from me or the nearness I feel to you in spirit. With our love to Greta, whose dainty, ruinously good chocolates we are still nibbling, and with cordial greetings to Governor Warren, Dr. Stoltz, and other friends whom we met at the dedication, I am devotedly yours, Helen Keller. I think that speaks better than any one of us can do in reminding you of how the ceremony went and what memories Helen Keller had of her stay here with us in California. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lowenfeld. Before we continue, I just wanted to give a special thanks to someone who just came, and that's the campus landscape architect, Joanna Kaufman. And she was instrumental in getting both the grove of redwood trees and the building named after Helen Keller. So I think that we'd all just give a little special round of applause to Joanna. She helped us get this through the university bureaucracy, and thank you very, very much. At this point, AER would like to take some time away from Helen Keller and present an award to someone in the Bay Area who's given outstanding service to the visually impaired for the last 20, 25 years, a little bit more. And as part of the presentation of this award, I'd like to present Dr. Philip Hatlin from San Francisco State University, who's going to explain its significance. Dr. Hatlin.
I want to begin by saying that I'm very proud of my professional organization today, which now twice has made certain that future generations of students at the University of California who live at this campus will never ever forget what this campus once was. And that pleases me a great deal, largely because if you look behind you on the second floor, there's a window with a curtain. That was my office in 1965 and 66. And I have a lot of fondness for the buildings and for this site, as do many people who remember this as the California School for the Blind. So again, many thanks to AER North for its and especially to Amanda Hall, who during her presidency made certain that these two events took place. The dedication of the Redwood Grove to Dr. Lowenfeld, and this rededication to Helen Keller. This is an event which makes me doubly pleased because the other aspect of the day, that of awarding the Sandra Coulterman Memorial Award, is also AER's gesture to make certain that the memory of Sandra Coulterman stays with us as long as possible. Those of us who have very vivid and strong memories of Sandy Coulterman don't need events like this because she'll live with us for a long time. But for those of you who never knew Sandy Coulterman, this continued honoring of Sandy through AER's award and also through a scholarship fund at San Francisco State University will assure us that Sandy will remain with us. Shortly after she died in 1979, I wrote a short description. And now Linda will see if I can get through it. Sandy Coulterman received her master's degree in education of the visually handicapped at San Francisco State University. She began her professional career with the Sacramento Society for the Blind. Then, after completing her MA, worked for several years as a rehabilitation teacher for the Peninsula Center for the Blind in Palo Alto. Later, Sandy served as both a rehabilitation teacher and a rehabilitation counselor for the California State Department of Rehabilitation. Toward the conclusion of her career, Sandy became a consultant to the Palo Alto Retinal Group, an opportunity which filled her with excitement and motivation. These words hardly describe the profound effect that Sandy had on the lives of both colleagues and clients, and words don't begin to describe the impact that she had among professionals and clients on the understanding of diabetes and diabetic retinopathy. During the time most of us knew Sandy, she herself had very little vision because of diabetic retinopathy. Sandy became known nationally as one who understood the effects of diabetes and of vision loss. She recognized many of the unmet needs affecting persons having diabetic retinopathy. For Sandy, assisting others whose vision had been affected by diabetes became a deep personal and professional obligation. Her workshops, her lectures, her individual counseling, her writing, and her humanitarian concern for those losing vision due to diabetic retinopathy serves as a model to many of the rest of us as to how we might most productively and creatively live our own professional lives. There are many who remember Sandy as an impatient, highly creative, highly motivated, energetic, professional young woman who knew her time was limited and realized how much there was to accomplish. Some of us have other memories of Sandy: picnics on park benches on sunny spring days, a telephone call during a particularly busy time with an invitation to go for a walk that evening and talk about anything but work, a pat on the shoulder and a positive compliment when it was most needed. Yes, Sandy Coulterman was a multifaceted young woman who knew not only how to contribute professionally in the area which concerned her greatly, but she also knew how to live life to its fullest. And for this, she should be a model for many of us. As I have reread this statement and as I shared it with you now, I can't help but think that there is no one more fitting to receive the Sandra Coulterman Award than my dear friend Nancy Atkinson. Nancy, in many ways, epitomizes the memory of Sandra in so many ways, and also, I think, primarily because of all the things that Nancy Atkinson did in her professional life, of all the things that Sandra Coulterman did in hers, nothing was more important to both of them than direct service to children, to clients, to families. And I'm sure it's for this reason that the Northern California chapter of AER voted to present to Nancy Atkinson this year's Sandra Coulterman Award. Nancy was with us in the Bay Area until about 2 weeks ago. Some of you who know Nancy well know that she lives about half of the year in the Bay Area, and the other half of the year she lives on the coast of Oregon in a small community called Arch Cape. And Nancy takes good care of herself. She knows when it's time to go back to Arch Cape, Oregon, and that's where she is right now. So to accept this award for Nancy Atkinson, she asked Berthold Lowenfeld to be here and to honor her by accepting her award at this time. So I'd like to ask Berthold to return and accept this plaque. on behalf of Nancy Ackerson. The plaque reads, Northern California Chapter AER Sandra Coulterman Award, presented to Nancy Ackerson in recognition of lifetime contributions to the field of visual impairment, June 28, 1987.
Nancy asked me to receive this award since she cannot be here, being in Oregon so far away from California that she didn't feel that she and her physique could afford to come back to Berkeley or to San Francisco within such a short time. Of course, I agreed to receive the award, and it gives me great pleasure to express to you her gratitude for the reception of this award. Nancy, as Phil has so ably said, is one of the great service persons that we have in our field. For this reason, she received recently the Alfred Allen Award of the AER. That's a national award, quite prestigious in its own way, and it reminds me of Alfred Allen. And in many ways, Nancy reminds me of Alfred Allen, whom I think, Bill, you knew Alfred Allen, I'm sure you did, yes. And some others may have known him too. He was an extremely dedicated person, and so is Nancy. There was nothing in his life that counted more to him than service to blind individuals. And there's nothing in Nancy's life that counts more than service to preschool blind and visually impaired children. Nancy is not only a person with emotional ties and a great dedication, but she is also a person with an enormous amount of experience and an enormous amount of knowledge. She has been a guiding light to the preschool services in California, and I must say that these services are probably among the best, if they are not the best, in the nation. Nancy would want me to express her thanks and to remind you of the great influences which some persons in our field have had on her. She would like me to say that she started her services as a young student with Walter Dry at the Oregon School for the Blind. Walter Dry picked her, I am sure, not because of her knowledge, because she had very little knowledge at that time of work with the blind, but he picked her because she was a redhead, and he had an unusual preference for redheads of the female gender. Walter Dry was a wonderful person, and those of you who knew him know that it was always fun to get together with him. And not only fun, but nobody ever left Walter Dry without benefiting from his personality. Nancy was under his influence, and under his influence, I must say, she developed the skill and the dedication to working with blind children. She came then to San Francisco and started as the first teacher, preschool work counselor, as they were called at that time, of the Variety Club Blind Babies Foundation. And as she grew professionally, she would recognize the influence of Polly Moore, of Sherry Rayner, of Georgia Lee Abel, and of our very good friend Phil Hatlin, Professor Dr. Phil Hatlin, to give him the full title now. So, Nancy, I accept for you this wonderful plaque, and I would like to close my short talk by saying that something that she has quoted often, and it is the closing of her remarks that she made when she received the Alfred Allen Award. she quoted Katharine Graham of the Washington Post. To love what you do and feel it matters, how could anything be more fun?
I'd like to thank you all for coming today, the day in which we honored the memory of Helen Keller, the memory of Sandra Coulterman, and one of the people who we have with us and who is thriving in Oregon right now, Nancy Atkinson. I know that Nancy was very, very pleased to receive this award, especially because she was quite a close friend of Sandy Coulterman. And she told me that she wasn't sure if she were here, if she would be able to get through the ceremony because of the closeness of her relationship with Sandy Coulterman. So thank you. Please help us finish some of the food that we have and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.